right, well, we're going to kick off our second round of our takeaways sections. So I'm going to call, just like I did in the morning, we're going to call up each of the table leads. They're going to come up, give about a 5-minute summary of what their tables, some of the highlights from their discussions. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A session, and then we will be complete. Send you back and out into the weather. All right, so let's kick things off. We're going to start with our frameworks table, table 2. That was led by Martin Stanley, representing NIST. All right, yeah, let's get it going. Table 2, some good table camaraderie. I'd love to see that. Here you go.
Thank you. Hello again. Thank you to Table 2 for all the great conversation about these questions. So we're talking about frameworks and evaluations. If I read the questions, it'll probably take too long. So do I have 10 minutes? 6 minutes, all right, great. So I think, we've got some pretty interesting points to make on this. First, the first question, what are some of the methods an organization can use to measure and quantify effectiveness of AI solutions? As we mentioned in the previous summary, OMB Memorandum 2521 requires agencies to demonstrate the value, the benefit, the impact of AI systems within their environment, particularly around key performance indicators and that kind of thing. So certainly the methods to measure the effectiveness of AI systems are keenly needed. And it's one of the biggest gaps that exists today. We have something within the AI risk management framework. There's 4 functions: govern, map, measure, manage. The measure function is exactly that. How do you measure risks and impacts of AI systems? We've got a research project at NIST specifically around that, but this is a big gap. So someday maybe I won't be working in government, and maybe sooner than later. But then I'm going to write a bunch of op-eds, and this would be one, which is we always hear about there's no measurement approaches for AI systems, and that's really not true. There's an entire systems engineering methodology out there with all kinds of approaches for measuring the performance of systems. And some of you who actually write contracts for your agency might even know that it's required in the FAR to actually test and evaluate systems. And one beautiful day, some AI team is going to meet a level 3 test manager, and that's going to be a fun day. So I think there's actually the point of all the comedy is that there's a lot of methods out there for testing and evaluating AI systems and measuring their performance, and it's important to work with an interdisciplinary team to understand, what you might have in your organization and build it around the mission, key performance indicator, the enterprise risk management functions that you're trying to manage, so that you can make good, data-informed decisions about how you deploy these systems. The second question was, how are you standardizing AI across agencies or departments? So we heard a couple comments on this. Mostly it's not much. And I think that has a lot to do with organizations that are under-resourced when it comes to AI talent. Obviously, the pace of innovation really works against having standardized approaches, which is why you need to have a good governance program in place so that you can prioritize the implementations that are going to be the most beneficial, and so that you can have the most impact for the dollars of investment. There's a huge opportunity, whether it's cost or time to implement, around standardizing these solutions. And I think where we can partner with the vendor community, in particular, to identify common use cases across government. We have things which I refer to as like inherently governmental AI use cases, something like evaluating or looking at responses to RFIs and things like that. That's something that we do in the government that would be incredibly assisted by like an AI system that had maybe a large language model capability to provide you with summaries of comments and things like that. What are some of your internal testing frameworks? Are you using open frameworks? Why or why not? We didn't have too much of this at the table, but we did hear that there's a variety of internal and open frameworks that are being used, in particular, dependent upon what kind of data and the restrictions around the data that were being used to train the system. That was a big determination as to whether or not an internal or open framework was being used. Last two questions. At what point in the AI loop do you include a human? I think one of the previous groups talked about this as well. So I think the entire loop is really the answer, but if you look at the AI risk management framework, there's 5 figures. Figure 2 is this modified AI lifecycle, which we're actually looking at updating because we think it needs to be more dynamic. But this life cycle approach includes data, people, the environment that it's operating. And I think we need to be considering where we have the right kind of oversight. And that's what the function of the AI governance board is in the M2521 memo. So think about that and the places where you want to include people to make sure systems are performing because of this lack of measurement capability. And the last one is, what challenges still exist around standards and how can government overcome them? Well, there's a lack of standards, and standards are lagging implementation. Implementation's moving pretty fast. And I think the biggest one that I generally hear is also, standards being incorporated into regulation, prior to you really understanding the consequences of that. And I think you can hear a lot of discussion about that. So, 6 seconds over, just like last time. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Next, I'm going to invite Colin Crosby and Angela Kovich up to the front for the governance. You want to take it?
I got it. Good afternoon, I'm Colin Crosby, and I led the governance table. I want to thank Table 3 for all the great, fruitful discussion we had. Really energized and motivated me this afternoon. The first question, how do you motivate staff to be curious about AI responsibility? So that was a great question, because with me, governance is such a personal thing for me, and this governance is all about the people. So you have to understand the people. You have to be able to understand who's your audience and be able to address that either by some kind of assessment, either by survey, either by one-on-one discussions. You have to be able to understand who is your audience and then tailor your, address that need for your audience. That's the only way you're going to get to do that. You cannot do governance in silos. You have to do it with people's participation. And so that's part of understanding motivation is one, you got to understand them. Two, you have to recognize, you have to give them a reason, either through some kind of recognition, through training, upskilling their, making sure that they have the right education and training to be able to understand what it is that we're trying to do. Make sure that you recognize them for participating in the transformation of your organization, because it is a transformation, and you're asking a lot of your teammates, the people that work with you, that may work for you, in order to elevate and move forward in this new paradigm. So, providing them the right training, understanding who they are, and then recognizing them, whether in public, whether through certification, recognizing what it is that they have done and how important their contribution is to the organization. The second question is, what safeguards can ensure AI system only access the data they are authorized to use? And how do you maintain those controls as data scales and shift across the enterprise? So that's a lot of that is technology, is having the right policies in place in order to make sure that those who need the information, who requires access to the information, can get the information. Because within multiple different organizations, there's different classification of data. There's secret, classified, confidential. You don't want to cross streams there. So you have to make sure that you have policies in place, technical policies in place to ensure that those classification level data that are different classification don't aggregate as well, because you can change the classification data when it aggregates. So yeah, you have to have those, and that requires making sure the data is tagged appropriately. Tagging data, having those data dictionaries, having data catalogs in place, ensuring that you have those technical things in place will help to ensure that you keep your data to the right, within the right environment, and the right people can have access to it. So that's an important and incredibly important aspect of making sure that we're not um, we're not losing the information to people who do not need to do it. Number three, how can agencies align AI development and compliance mandates, record detention, FOIA privacy laws without slowing innovation? And again, a lot of that, we tied that back to governance and making sure we up the governance framework. Having the right governance framework in place is really important to understand, and making sure that we're compliant, having compliance officers in place, making sure that we have the right specialists, subject matter experts in place to ensure that we are meeting the regulations that we have to. So again, that goes back to people, it goes back to trust, it goes back to understanding how we are using the data and how we are engaging with the individuals or people, our organization, to make sure that they understand and then use the data appropriately. What roles and responsibilities should be clearly defined across an agency for tagging, classifying, and curating data to ensure AI models are trustworthy and auditable? So this is something that I think maybe a lot of organizations struggle with, and we kind of looked at it from a team, building a team prospect, but a team could include your data analyst, your data owner, your information security officer. All these people are needed, so all these roles need to be defined. Why? Because there's so many aspects of this, and data can cross streams. You want to make sure that the data is tagged appropriately. You want to make sure the data is secured. You want to make sure the system is secured, so that when we do bring the data together, that we're in a safe environment. We want to make sure that the aggregation of the data doesn't push the data outside of the original concept of what we're trying to do. So we have to make sure the tagging of the data is ensured. So all these roles that we're looking at has to be defined. The data owner has to give permission to utilize the data. The system owner needs to understand the use of the system and the data that's being piped in. And so we have to make sure that those roles are defined, and that's something that we're in the process of doing and repeatedly doing over and over again, because it changes. This environment changes, roles are being collapsed. What was once just data is now AI. What was once just AI is now data and AI. What was meant before that was information and knowledge management. So all these things are bleeding together and coming together, and we have to reclassify roles. We have to understand what are the roles and responsibilities of each of those disciplines bring to the table. So you have to have, once you set up your team, you have to make sure that the roles and individuals that are part of the team are defined appropriately so they can engage. Thank you.
All right. Next, we're going to have Jamie from the Interoperability table. Come on up. Jamie's from DIU. Come on up. Thank you.
All right. So we had 3 questions. 2 of them kind of bled together. So the first one was, how can government take the lead on creating or utilizing existing interoperability standards to adopt new technology quickly? Second question, what changes to architecture are required to accommodate interoperability of commercial technology? So these 2, the group, we talked about it, and one of the concepts was kind of a hub and spoke model. In other words, you have the legacy systems and you have a way of kind of connecting it. So think about your iPhone, whichever version you're on, right? So they keep changing the plug-in, but the car has USB. your car has not adapted to whatever version of the new USB-C or whatever DX, whatever version we're on. So the constant legacy of the car does not adapt to the modern technology of my phone, but I still have to charge it. Okay, now there you can sit it off to the side. I mean, there's other things. But the point is, you have to buy a dongle, right? You gotta find, yeah, does anyone, raise your hand, does anyone have a dongle somewhere in your house for some of those things? Yeah. So you can't throw out all the legacy and just kind of swap new, but you still need to adapt the new into whatever that legacy is. So that concept is one of the things that we talked about for interoperability in the government. We can't swap out all the legacy overnight, but we can start thinking about investing in some of those dongles, right? How do we help find those connectivity points to our legacy data, legacy systems, you name it. Another concept that we came up with was pivoting from the hardware approach, a lot of on-prem. And so one person in our group had mentioned they have a budget for refreshing their hardware. Okay, let's move to the cloud. Repurpose some of those savings into investment. So kind of looking at where are we spending today and where can we modernize some of the infrastructure that we currently have, which is not a huge lift. I mean, it's work, but it's not a huge lift to go from buying a new server to licensing space in a cloud. The other one is a potential approach of digital twin. So not stopping whatever your current processes are and the systems you're working with, but let's build something parallel off to the side. Now, I'm from DIU. We love to prototype. I love to tinker. And so before you go and deploy this brand new thing and make everybody adopt this new thing, why don't you have a Tiger team say, okay, let's see, is this something that's modular enough? Is this gonna adapt to the way we need to do our business? Because again, the last thing we want is to have a break in service. So if that service is food stamps, we don't want a break in that, right? If it is our veterans being seen at a VA hospital, can't have a break. But that doesn't mean we don't innovate. So how do you find that safe way in which you can start to kind of move things over? So that's another approach. And then we talked about Lego blocks. So how do we have sort of this structure in which you have this, we talked about the government creating standards. Now, I don't mean down to the nth degree of, oh, your USB port should be this big and this high and this thing. But essentially, open standards of how do we find out what commercial is using and adopt that as our government standard rather than forcing some version of the reality that nobody else operates under. So adopting commercial standards as, hey, the Lego blocks, every Lego block has the same size thing. Okay, we all can agree this is how Legos need to be built. Some are longer, some are taller, some are blue and green and other things, right? But we all know that they will fit together. If I need them, they will fit together. So creating that sort of standard that is in conjunction with commercial, and then allowing us to create an environment where we can remove a Lego if it's not the best of breed. We can test it, put it on. Oh, now we need 2 of those. Okay, we can keep stacking. So that's another approach. But before we do any of that, a lot of folks at our table mentioned we have to first map out the current state, because sometimes we don't even know the systems that we have operating, and some are like in some back door that one person used and we didn't know it and we turned it off. So doing that current state mapping, okay, here's what we have, and then you can determine what the Gardner time approach, I don't know if anyone knows that one, so someone brought it up at our table, and that is tolerate, invest, modernize, or eliminate. And run that through all the things that you have, whether that's a data set that, hey, you think it's exquisite, but then you realize these 2 other data sets, if I use this one and this one, it actually covers down on that. So maybe I don't need to carry that over. So things like that to just kind of start to think about that interoperability, that modernization effort that has to happen. Someone else brought up an idea of GSA, kind of creating a baseline of enterprise, sort of that original Lego that then we can put the apps on, mission-specific apps. So that's another concept. I'm not pushing a solution here, I'm pushing ideas. And that could help us scale, right? So the last question we had is, how can software use case inventories create opportunities for better visibility across entire government architecture for both vendors and agencies. So what that essentially is saying is we have sort of a landing spot. Think of Amazon, and I'm searching for, I don't know, socks. Or I'm searching for a Mother's Day gift, and I'll type in Mother's Day gifts, and I'll get all the things. And it will show me all the things, or bracelets that are custom for mothers, or whatever. So what if we had that, and the government could search, hey, I want to find anyone who's used something for crop rotation. Are there any models out there that have been developed or used for crop rotation? Oh, here's the model, here's the vendor we used, here's the agency that used it. Great, that creates visibility for both that vendor to be seen, like, hey, I sold it over here. Now USDA, so maybe the Peace Corps developed it, and the USDA is like, oh, I can use that. That's great. Or I'm gonna try it. Maybe it's not the right fit. And then, like Amazon, I can buy it and I'm gonna check it out. That was too small for me. Okay, runs small, runs big, whatever. But at least there's visibility rather than I'm gonna go bid this out, I'm gonna go figure out this new thing. So that potential inventory of the use cases, again, not all models are created equal. They're being used in different ways, but if we understood how those models are being used, potentially there's opportunity for both savings for the agencies as well as visibility for the vendors. Now, what it also creates is open competition. So the biggest thing we wanted to avoid was, and we were talking about at our table, is we don't really want a winner-takes-all environment anymore. We need to create this competition, this hunger. So you have the lions and the gazelles. And every morning, both the lion wakes up, and his goal is to catch the gazelle. And every morning that gazelle wakes up, and their job is to just outrun the lion. But everyone's hungry and everyone's racing. That's the best place to be for us as the government to get the best solution that we need. So that's kind of that, how do we create that environment that allows for that transparency? Now we also have to be mindful because we want to make sure new entrants can come in and it's not, oh, well, this one's already the one that we use. So there's other things, again, I'm not pushing policy, just getting ideas. What else? I would say in closing, just be mindful that there is the mandate from both the SecDef and the White House on rapid software procurement. So if you're thinking FAR-based and your head's going to that, I think you've missed the news. We're now having to procure much, much faster. So other transaction authority is now the #1 way to procure software because we can't wait. We can't do this 3-year cycle of bid, contest, rebid, select, build. Then maybe you see results. We can't do, our adversaries are not doing that. We cannot do that. And obviously I'm speaking from the DoD perspective, but I think everyone understands we have to leapfrog forward. So by doing that, we have to think about this interoperability question in everything we do, whether you're a vendor and you're building something, or whether you're in the agency and you're having to procure. I would say the biggest thing to leave you with is be a team. So work with other agencies, find out how they're doing this, learn from each other. That's huge. It's part of what today is. So thank you, GovCIO. Pick your battles, start small, right? Find out what is a chunk of the elephant that you can bite to start to make an impact. And those are the thoughts on interoperability.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Okay, moving on to red teaming AI. I know there was some interest there earlier in the morning, so I'm glad we had a table around it. It's going to be Jesus. Come on.
Thank you very much, and great advice there from our DIU colleagues. So when it comes to the red teaming, so what is red teaming? Let me put it very quickly here for you guys. When we start doing proactively, try to identify safety risk, bias, and other potential issues with AI, so we're doing like a red teaming exercise to identify those. So our table here, table number 5, was about focusing on red teaming. And the first question was about what are some of the biases and safety risks of AI? So we spent actually most of our time discussing the bias and the safety risk. Interesting enough, about half of the table is in the healthcare space, so we focus a lot, use cases discussing healthcare use cases. But when it comes to bias and safety risks, bias, after a lot of conversations and so on, we concluded that it's impossible to build a bias-free system. Instead, we need to focus on the mitigation of those potential biases. Type of biases. There's data bias. Any training data will have bias, where it came from, who were the participants, where that data came from, and who generated that data. All that automatically will have data training bias. Age bias, you will see that. Race bias, label bias, how you label. This is in this class versus this is in another class, so label bias. Gender, and then I start another one, sample bias, how much data you use for a specific group versus a different groups, the sample, the N. Then DoD specific, and I will go into details in 3 minutes about this. We have seen deployment bias, location bias, as well as rank bias. And I will go into more details about that in a little bit. But also we talked that sometimes introducing bias to the models is important. A good example that he gave there is like dermatology. Dermatology, you need to understand the skin tone, darker, you might need to have a different model than a light skin. So you need to introduce those bias. So bias, once again, going back to the big picture, we have to keep an eye on all these different type of bias. Sometimes we know that bias might be explicitly defined to be able to better improve the accuracy of these models. Then we start discussing safety. So we decided to stay away from the cybersecurity lane of safety and mostly talk about the human safety issues here. One example that was given was we need to keep in mind national security. For example, in the genomic space, it was mentioned this morning. We saw what happened with 23andMe recently, right? Went bankrupt and so on, the data, there are no laws about what can happen with that data and so on. That is a huge risk. And I think actually, personal liability, that is a gap that we have in our laws and our privacy laws that I think were exposed with this issue with 23andMe. So that's a safety concern. Another safety concern, it is, as I was mentioned again this morning, 20%, I believe it was mentioned, of these are healthcare prompts. There's a lot of safety concerns. When do you go to the doctor versus not, and so on. Keeping that in mind will be, and always will be, super important. So then, for the interest of time, then we wrap up the conversation about red teaming exercise. What are some of the use cases and so on? So I expressed, 2 weeks ago, I was at the MHS conference, Military Health System Conference. So soon, next week, I think they will be posting the slides. So you can find more information there. So I gave a talk about the red teaming exercise that we completed across military medicine. In that exercise, we recruited 200 providers from all around the world, gave them 4 different large language models, and I start asking them, okay, you don't know what model is. We have OpenAI, we have Anthropic, we have Gemini, and so on. It was ABC or alpha, beta, and so on. They did not know because we did not want to introduce bias towards the model. They used it for a few months, and then we closed the exercise, red teaming exercise, and we got 835 submissions of potential bias or issues. So what happened? We started going through those 800 plus, and we found, for example, location bias. If I go and say, hey, I have a male service member, 34-year-old, showing up to the clinic with lower back pain, what should I tell the service member to do to get over that pain? If I said, I'm here in the Pentagon versus I'm in Arkansas, the response was very different because automatically the models think that if you're in DC, in the Pentagon, you have better education. So we start seeing those embedded bias in location-based. Rank, when we start talking about captain in the Army versus captain in the Navy, automatically it start adding some bias. Say, oh yeah, sure, this person is more senior, therefore is better prompts, better results, and so on. We start seeing a number of other bios that I don't have time to go through here, but if you want to learn more about it, MHS conference, the slides will be posted, and we'll be publishing this. Also, I think this was sponsored by the DoD CDAO, so early this year in January, we released a press release with some of the findings. But red teaming exercises, I think, is critical, so your organization have a baseline, so then when we bring the vendors, we know how to test the system for our use case. And that's the table for red teaming exercises.
All right, thank you, Jesus. Okay, we're gonna hand it over again to the acquisition table with Katrina. Thank you very much.
All right, good afternoon. So we had 3 questions that guided our discussion this afternoon with regard to the use of AI and acquiring AI via federal acquisition. So gonna talk a little bit about, I'm making sure I don't go over time here this time. So the first question was, how can AI be used to improve and develop efficiencies in acquisitions, and what could it streamline? Now, I heard earlier that at federal acquisitions, I just want to say it for officially. I spent a whole career in acquisitions. So oftentimes, the reason why things take long, and you can tell people, Katrina said this, is because of interpretation. It does not have to take that long, and we don't actually need OTAs to make sure that we do it quicker. It really is more about interpretation and how we actually engage the acquisition process. So it can happen faster. AI has a great opportunity, though, to take away some of the laborious efforts that are embedded in processes. So at table, where were we at? I'm sorry, table 6, one of the things we discussed is something that most of the folks who are engaged in any kind of preparation for contracts actually hates, and that is the market research. You know, sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes it takes months, but because across government we're doing it, everyone is doing it. Cores are doing it, program managers are doing it, contracting officers are taking a look at it, and in some instances they're also doing it. So often, and utilizing information that typically is publicly available. Right, sometimes in the GSA portals, sometimes that information is available. Additionally, in what I call the old-fashioned retrievers, where we have contract files, but now we also have them electronically. But utilizing AI to quicken this process can be a great opportunity if we would take advantage of it, because across government, we are utilizing open source information to build this capability that is required by FAR Part 10. And so it is a part of the requirement to move forward with an acquisitions. So we looked at market research as a low-hanging fruit that can be utilized in, that technology, utilizing AI technology, can make this move a little more quickly and also take advantage of opportunities for a vast amount of information that we would otherwise maybe not have access to when we're doing them in our silos. So that was one area that we talked about. We also talked a little bit about the other areas of this, what we call the source selection process in federal government. And that source selection process has a litany of processes that are involved, but specifically the one that takes the longest is the proposal evaluation. So that's where we get into where people say, oh, this is taking 2 years, this is taking 3 years, and it depends on the complexity of what it is that we're buying. But AI has great opportunity there in the various aspects. The only problem is the ingest of data typically includes proprietary information, business sensitive information, and source selection sensitive type of information, just, as a few of those pieces and types of data that would have to be ingested. So data containment and boundaries will definitely be necessary. Strong governance structures and frameworks are also necessary, because there would need to be a need to know and need to access kind of structure put in place. Because just because they're a federal employee, it doesn't necessarily mean they're in the need to know on that pieces of information. The market competitiveness of vendors who entrust this information to government is a very sensitive area. And so entrusting that kind of a tool with the right community would be very, very important. So we moved on to question number 2, and question number 2 is, how can you measure our return on investment with AI tools? We came up with a few areas there. And I think everybody can agree with cost savings. Time, resources, as well as manpower reduction would be a way that we would measure that. Customer satisfaction, both internal as well as the American public where we do service delivery. Productivity. So the volume of the process also that can be eliminated. How many processes or pieces of processes have we been able to eliminate as a result of the use of artificial intelligence in our work areas? The time frame for seeing tangible benefits is also another area where we can measure return on investments. And then the quality of the data and the accuracy of what it is that we are receiving. So that also is a testing process, but it also, how long does it take us to get to ensuring that we've got quality and accuracy in what it is that the output would be. The final question there is, how do you measure whether an AI solution meets your needs? So we had quite a bit of conversation back and forth, and I'm looking at my time, I'm over again. I was trying really hard there. I'm gonna be really quick. Impact on users was a big area that we thought would be how we determine how it meets our needs, because I heard some of the other conversations with, the usage by the employee groups and how well it scales and how quick folks are, or organizations are, to adopt the technology. Well, how is that? We looked at reduction of burnout. How do we measure that? And so we were talking about ways to measure that. The turnover rate, so attrition, how important is that? So those are ways that we can look at the impact on the users as well as and our employees. And then when there is a clear, specific vision for what is to be achieved, we can measure the success percentage. And that would come with customer experience. So a shift in our customer feedback, so utilizing surveys and various other tools to gather information from our customer base, be it internal customers or external customers. A shift in that feedback is a way that we can determine if it's meeting our needs, but also utilizing ways as a business process to measure that. Rate of adoption. How much percentage of use across an organization? How quickly can we scale it? And then finally, just how much time did it take to reveal its value to the organization? All right, well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you again, Katrina. All right, last but certainly not least, we're going to go with Table 7, in-house AI development with Jacob Glassman.
All right, I got the privilege of wrapping it up, so I'll be very quick. So we had a pretty robust discussion, and one interesting takeaway for me is a lot of these questions, and you'll see like a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap between everything we're talking about. So this may be a little bit redundant, but it may also revalidate a lot of what we heard. So, and I have a couple bullet points here that I selfishly kind of want to give to the audience anyway, so I'll hijack it a little bit in that case. So the first question was, how many services, there are many services in AI that are not GPT, and what are some different types of solutions? So this is where I talked a little bit earlier how I kind of get in my bubble sometimes in Department of Defense, right? Because and outside the bubble, a lot of people think enterprise systems, think big, large. We talk about health, we talk about DHS, other things, where I'm thinking much more on the edge. I'm thinking much more of an aircraft or a forward operating base or a submarine or a destroyer, et cetera. So one thing that I put here in terms of differentiating different types really is talking about what I call these are Jake's words, which aren't always the best, but I call more tactical versus enterprise AI. And that's an important differentiation. And I talk about that in the sense that having an 18-wheeler and a Formula One car out front, I have two vehicles out front. They have very little to do with one another. AI can really work the same way. So when I talk about the different types of AI solutions, really there are different mindsets for each in terms of security, in terms of data needs, in terms, et cetera, that we've really, really talked about. So that's really a big differentiator that I'd kind of like to put forward. So don't forget about our men and women serving forward and forward operating bases that can't always get the latest patch, or their data may be SAP level acoustic data, for example, things like that, or things in space. So when you think about these types of solutions and what we need to do, it's not always about a GPT. It's about how to bring AI to augment and enhance a lot of our capability. The second question is, what are some pros and cons of developing AI in-house? So this is kind of a typical government thing, actually, where the phrase I was using was, well, if you build it, you own it. And say, oh, there's no commercial solution available, maybe, or maybe there is, but it's only 97% what I need. I need 100%, so I'm going to go off on my own and build my own thing. Well, congratulations. You now own the entire logistics tail of all of that. So, so the pro of it is, especially for our more bespoke solutions, especially the tactical ones I just talked about, you need to own it. Absolutely, we need to own that due to classification, due to other things. But a lot of the applications we actually don't, and we have a pretty nasty habit in the government of finding solutions where there's a good enough solution already available. And we already talked about the executive order that came out that says we shall use commercial solutions. At least in the Navy, we've been very, very supportive of that in terms of, okay, how do we adopt these solutions? And now I get to leverage all the investment that came behind it in the commercial world. That wasn't federal government investment. That was venture capital investment, or that was commercial industry investment. And I get all that enhancement instead of me branching off on my own, and now I own it. Now I need the whole funding stream to go along with that, which, by the way, chokes out the other innovation because I got money going to things that I could have just bought licenses for. So those are the pros and cons, and they're important. I won't go as far to say that, hey, everything we could do is on the commercial side, and we don't need to do any type of development. That's just not true. However, we tend to build our own way too much, and I think we do a very poor job, specifically with our architectures, to use that as an excuse on why we need to do it. So those are really the pros and cons, at least as I see it, of developing AI in-house. Third question is, how do you pilot AI, and how do you know it's successful getting open to more people? What are some use cases? So for this, I'm going to selfishly plug what we're doing with the Don GPT alpha trials. We had a pretty robust discussion, especially with DHS and some other agencies, how a lot of people are afraid, especially right now, right? No one wants to stick their neck out, right? But at least we heard, I think the quote was, we had a solution, we're kind of at the goal line, but no one wants to sign off on it. So that's a terrible excuse. That's an entire waste. If you either do it or don't do it, right? So what we did is we partnered with a friend of GovCIO, the Navy CIO and CTO, and we got it all authorized, ATO, ready to go. So that way we created a safe space, so to speak, for rapidly trialing these capabilities. No, you don't need to worry about this data going in, or, oh my God, did I do this? No, you are absolutely clear. It's all approved by the CIO, and it's being run with the CTO and through the secretary. So that just completely opened that freedom to that kind of thing. And I guess it made me kind of proud of the Navy for us taking that leap, because what I'm hearing from other agencies, they don't have that, or at least some of them don't, and that's really unfortunate. So how do you pilot it? I'll say, start small. Don't boil the ocean. We do a terrible job of that. And two, make sure you can scale and transition. There is nothing worse that I see than an incredible capability that's game-changing. And like, oh, this is great as a leader in the Navy. Say, oh, this is absolutely amazing. Great, when can the warfighter get it? No problem. We need about 3 or 4 years and a couple other things, and then we can get the thing that I just showed you. That is awful. So that's why for our alpha trials, it is in IL5. It is already certified. It can scale to every single member in the Navy and Marine Corps, right? Is it gonna work? I don't know, right? That's what the alpha trials are for, exercising use cases. Maybe some things will work, maybe some things won't. If it won't, we have the humility, we'll kill it right then and there. If it will, we can immediately scale. And that's absolutely critical, and that is the bit that a lot of people really, really forget. They get too in love with the technology, and then they just go to that. And I'll stop there because I promised to be short, and now I'm over time. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Jake. I will say I always get nervous when the Navy starts suggesting boiling the ocean, but you know, we're not quite there with the AI technologies quite yet. All right. Well, I did promise I wanted to have a Q&A session here at the end. So I didn't know if anybody, Amy, I don't know if you want to grab a mic, if anybody had a question for any of the leads or any follow-up questions from what they heard. Anybody? Or is everybody ready? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I think at your table you were talking about a solution to being able to identify use cases in different models. And I know, I think you do a little work with the intelligence community, but I think one of the solves there that I've heard about is they've actually developed, and I think this is something everyone could explore, they've trained a model on the models, and so they feed in the use case information and the various types of models that are available, and you can go in and you can plug in a prompt saying, I'm trying to solve for X, and it'll feed you back a possible solution. So I thought that was a really interesting take on what to do. So I just brought it up.
Okay. Anybody had a follow-up to that? Oh, go ahead, Brian. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, this was for actually the last group that spoke or anyone that has a solution to this. So I'm all for the government procuring commercial solutions and not reinventing the wheel, but how do we prevent vendor lock so that anytime our mission changes slightly, we don't need to go back to the same vendor to keep upgrading and getting updates?
Oh, do you want to address that? Sure. Okay. Yeah.
So with the companies that we work for, typically the procurement, it's within our T's and C's that we work with the vendor determining like what exactly we have our needs for. So I think that really has to do more with the procurement, and typically we're looking at like year-by-year contracts. That kind of helps with a little bit of that vendor lock. But I think we have, it kind of depends use case by use case, depending on what the needs are. But I agree that I think with what we're seeing in the industry, at least from like the research perspective, that I've had kind of a sample across supply chain from small, medium to large businesses, it looks like we, most of the time we're trying to procure third parties, but we're putting more of the onus on like indemnification. So we're keeping our own IP, and we're not trading that within the, they're not allowed to use our data to train their models, if that makes sense. I know we talked about that at another table, but the third parties are what are being leveraged, so we can focus on our specific use cases in our specific realm of knowledge. So.
Yeah, and I think, yep.
And maybe my industry partners might get mad at hearing this, but I think it's also good to demand that question and kind of understand the flexibility of the outputs, right? Today, at least as it relates to AI, the big overarching theme is data. That data is owned by you, right? So when we think of vendor lock-in, you're already thinking, in the wrong lens, because the data, the power of the data is already yours. What you do with it and getting outputs out of that should be an expectation out of industry.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, it's a good question, Brian. I think that's something that they're trying to steer away from, sure, certainly. Okay. Anybody else have a question? No? Oh, go ahead, sure.
I don't mean to ask another question about AI red teaming, as I know that we discussed it, but just a comment. So the Center for Secure Emerging Technology out of Georgetown, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Anyone familiar with this? Okay. They have a handbook. I think it's called AI Safety Handbook, but it talks a little bit about the difference between intangible harm and tangible harm. The difference between the two is that tangible harm is really looked at more of like a security standpoint, and then safety is looked at more of the intangible harms, like what are the biases, what are the vulnerabilities, and securing for those is a little bit different than we're looking at for the security of our AI systems. The security of our AI systems, as I understand it, is really, I think there's and I'm terrible with names, but there was I think a number of years ago, if someone knows the name of whoever said this, but essentially, there's an analogy. If you are driving a car and you get in an accident and your seatbelt doesn't work, is it your fault or is it the car manufacturer's fault? It's the car manufacturer's fault, right? So why is it that we're using third-party AI systems, and if there's a security issue, why is it our fault? Right? So I think that's some of the questions that we should be asking to our vendors. But also, we should be setting the standard, like the gentleman just said earlier, like our data, our privacy, our safety, we can set those standards as well. And it is a little bit more on the privacy side of things, which that could maybe is a little bit of a blurred line between security and privacy, but I think that's something that like I said, the CSET has a good handbook in terms of what are the differences between the two in terms of how we test and measure and validate for those. I think we're all trying to wrap our arms around that. But so if anyone has a solution, let me know.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's excellent. Okay. Well, I think that wraps it up for today. Before we close, I did want to make a quick, I know I mentioned a couple of our events later in the year earlier, but here they are up on the screen. We have our AI Building Blocks workshop. I'll jump down to our AI in Action workshop too in August. So the way that those are set up are more like teaching opportunities, learning opportunities, where we're going to hit it over to do some more instructional piece of learning about different areas for AI. So the one that we're going to do next month is going to be at the Microsoft building in DC. Really encourage that. There should be some great work over there. Is it not at the Microsoft building? I thought it was. Where is it? Oh, Partnership for a Public Service, excuse me. Microsoft is going to be one of the sessions, so excuse me there. And then we have, like I mentioned earlier, we have the Federal IT Efficiency Summit in July. That should be great in Tyson's. And then later in the year, we have our Health IT Summit, which is always very popular in September in Rockville/Bethesda. And then last but certainly not least, our AI Summit in Tyson's in November. So please mark those down on your calendar. Should be fantastic. Okay, next slide. So yeah, I did want to send one last shout out to our sponsors. Thank you so much. Hopefully everybody got a chance to visit with them there in the back. Also, big thank you to Carosoft, our anchor sponsor, and who are also our host for the day. Just to remind everybody, our gold sponsors today were Box and ServiceNow. Our silver sponsor was Granicus, Snorkel, Stirk AI, Voltron Data, and ZL Tech. Our bronze sponsor was InfoBastion, Latent AI, and Seeker. And then our partner sponsor was Orange Slices. So we got to see a lot of them, and hopefully everybody got a chance to talk with them. But yeah, fantastic. So thanks, everybody. I hope everybody had a great time today, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks.